Fort Cypher, Virginia, November. The kind of cold that gets inside a building before anyone opens a door. It lives in concrete and steel and fluorescent light and the silence of a military base at 0530 when the day hasn't decided what it's going to be. A woman walks down a corridor that smells like floor wax and recycled air. She carries a translation brief, a cup of coffee she hasn't touched, and 5 languages in her head. Her ID badge reads, Captain Sarah Kane, Linguistics Division, NATO Liaison. Her boots make no sound on the polished floor. Not because she's trying to be quiet, because she spent enough years moving through dangerous places that silence became automatic. The way breathing is automatic, the way checking exits is automatic, the way noting the position of every person in a room before stepping inside it becomes automatic after enough time in enough places. She has been at this base for 4 months. Nobody knows why she's really here. At the end of the corridor, behind a set of double doors, a man is laughing. The laugh carries. It's designed to carry. Loud and confident and slightly too large for the space containing it. The laugh of a man who has spent years ensuring that rooms remember him when he leaves. His name is Marcus Webb, Major Marcus Webb, SEAL instructor, combat veteran. The kind of man who introduces himself with his trident before he introduces himself with his name. He is 44 years old, 220 pounds of operational pedigree and institutional authority, and at this moment he stands in the dining facility holding court over a table of junior officers who laugh, because that is what you do when Marcus Webb tells a story. Sarah stops outside the double doors. She doesn't push them open yet. She stands for exactly 4 seconds, coffee in hand, and listens to that laugh. 4 months. She has listened to that laugh for 4 months. Watched him move through briefings and training rooms and corridors with the casual authority of a man who has never questioned whether he belongs. Watched him identify weakness in other people the way a surgeon identifies tissue quickly, without hesitation, and then press on that weakness with professional efficiency. She has watched him, and she has waited. Because the man behind those double doors sent 11 of her people into an ambush 4 years ago. 11 operators. 11 people who trusted the intelligence he provided. Sarah Kane is not at Fort Cypher to translate. She is here to make sure he cannot do it again. She pushes open the double doors and walks into the room. Here is what you need to understand before anything else. There are moments in this story that will not go the way you expect. There is a truth buried under 4 years of classified paperwork and institutional silence that is going to come into the light, and when it does, it will redefine everything you thought you understood about what happened in Somalia in September of 2019. But the story doesn't start in Somalia. It starts here, in this corridor, with a woman holding a cup of coffee she never drinks, watching a man she has studied for 4 months. Because the most important thing about what is coming is not the confrontation, not the hearing, not the range, not the moment in a conference room when everything comes apart. The most important thing is the patience required to get there. 4 months of patience, 4 years of patience before that. The kind built from having nothing left to lose except the one thing you came to do. 4 months from now, in a conference room in this building, Marcus Webb will look across a table at the woman he spent weeks trying to destroy. He will understand in the space of 3 seconds exactly what has happened, exactly what she has been doing, exactly how completely he walked himself into what she built for him. That moment is coming. But you have to understand how it was built. To understand what Sarah Kane was doing in that corridor on that November morning, you need to go back to the night she arrived. Fort Cypher is not the kind of base that appears on maps available to the public. It sits on 340 acres of Virginia countryside that looks from the road like a combination of federal research facility and corporate campus. Inside the perimeter, it functions as an advanced training and coordination center for special operations personnel, intelligence assets, and select international partners. The people who work there are, with very few exceptions, exceptionally good at what they do. Marcus Webb is exceptionally good at what he does. That is not in dispute. 11 confirmed combat deployments. More commendations than most officers accumulate in a full career. He runs the close quarters combat instruction program with competence impossible to fake. When he stands in front of a training room, people listen. When he speaks in a briefing, people defer. When he decides someone doesn't belong in a particular space, that person generally finds themselves removed through the smooth, nearly invisible machinery of institutional favor. He is good at all of it. He is especially good at identifying people he can safely dismiss. Sarah Kane was easy to dismiss. That was by design. She arrived in July carrying the most deliberately unremarkable credentials her handler could construct. linguistic specialist, Harvard graduate. 4 years of graduate work in Central Asian languages with a secondary focus on dialect variations in conflict zones. Clean service record, nothing classified, nothing triggering a second look. She requested assignment to translation support and intelligence summary services, placing her in rooms adjacent to operational planning without placing her in the rooms themselves. She was on paper exactly what she appeared to be. Marcus Webb looked at her once in her first week, made a determination in approximately 4 seconds, and filed her in the part of his brain reserved for people who could be safely ignored. He was wrong. He wouldn't find out for 4 months. The night Sarah Kane arrived at Fort Cypher, she sat in her quarters with the lights off. She opened a file on her personal tablet. Not a work file, a personal file protected by 3 separate encryption protocols and a password she had changed every 30 days for 4 years without ever writing it down. The file contained photographs. 11 photographs. She didn't need to look at them. She had memorized every face years ago, the way you memorize something you return to every day, not because you've forgotten it, but because forgetting it is something you refuse to allow. She looked anyway. One face at a time. Marcus Reed, 28 years old, from Bozeman, Montana. He used to tape photographs of his daughter to the inside of his locker and talk about her with the unashamed enthusiasm of a man who hadn't yet learned to be quieter about the things that mattered most. Tyler Cross, 31, from outside Raleigh. He read paperback westerns in the spare minutes between briefings, dog-earing the pages, even though everyone told him not to. She went through all 11. When she finished, she reached into her jacket pocket and removed a challenge coin. Minted in standard size, slightly heavier than most copper zinc alloy that had been silver when new. It wasn't silver anymore. The surface was worn smooth from handling the smoothness that takes years to develop, that comes from being held and turned and held again in the dark of too many nights to count. On the front, barely visible, the Phantom Strike insignia, a stylized mark that no longer appeared in any official database because the unit it represented had been classified into non-existence. On the back, 11 signatures. Not printed, not engraved. Scratched by hand with a stylus into the metal before Somalia. Before anyone knew the signatures would become the only monument these 11 people were going to get. Sarah held the coin for a long time. Then she closed the photograph file, put the coin back in her pocket, and turned on the light. She had work to do. Colonel Edmund Hargrove had been running Fort Cypher for 3 years, long enough to understand that the institution he commanded and the institution appearing on the organizational charts were two different things related, the way a river on a map relates to the actual river. He was 61 years old. He had served in the Gulf in 1991 as a young captain standing in desert heat. He still sometimes felt in his joints on cold Virginia mornings, watching the organized chaos of a campaign going better than anyone expected, and worse than the official briefings suggested. He had served in the years after that in places still classified, doing things he understood the necessity of without ever fully making peace with them. He had watched good people make bad decisions under impossible pressure, and bad people make decisions that looked good until they didn't, and he had developed over 30 years a precisely calibrated instrument for detecting when the story he was being told and the story actually happening had begun to diverge. At 0500 on a November morning, Hargrove stood at his office window and watched the base come to life in the gray light before sunrise. He held his coffee with both hands. He didn't think of it as meditation. He thought of it as looking, just looking, paying attention to what was in front of him before the day filled up with what people wanted him to pay attention to. He had been paying attention to Sarah Kane for about 6 weeks, not because anything was obviously wrong, a translator doing translation work unremarkable in every external way, but Hargrove had spent 3 decades in rooms with operators, and certain things don't train out of people once trained in. The way they move through a space, the quality of stillness when thinking, the way their eyes catalog a room before their expression responds to it. He watched her. He noted what he saw. He said nothing to anyone. Not yet. The incident happened on a Tuesday. The room was a combat simulation facility on the east side of the training complex. 60 feet by 40. Polished tactical mat. Wall-mounted cameras at 4 angles. Biometric monitoring panels that track personnel heat signatures, and since the NATO upgrade the previous quarter, individual impact force when sensors were active. 15 international observers were present, Danish military liaisons, 2 British SAS sergeants on exchange, a German coordination officer, others representing the administrative geometry of Allied training programs. Marcus Webb was demonstrating. That was his natural state, the mode in which he was most comfortable, the setting that brought out the authority he'd built his career on. He moved through the training room with the ease of a man in his element, voice carrying posture, communicating everything about his assessment of who belonged and who didn't. Sarah had requested participation. She had done it quietly through proper channels with the correct form submitted the previous afternoon. Marcus had seen the request and approved it with the particular brand of approval designed to become publicly embarrassing for the person requesting it. She stood at the edge of the mat, hands behind her back, posture parade ground clean. Watching Marcus Webb with the same expression she wore reading intelligence intercepts, the same expression she wore in briefings, the same expression she wore eating alone in the dining facility. Focused, present, empty of everything he was looking for. He introduced her to the room. Captain Kane, Linguistics, Translation Services. The inflection he gave the words conveyed everything about his opinion without technically stating any of it. He turned to address the assembled observers and talked about the difference between operators and support personnel, about conditioning and commitment, about training that separated the people who had earned the right to be in a room like this from those present by administrative coincidence. A few people laughed. Not everyone, but enough. He moved to the center of the mat and motioned her forward. He said he was going to demonstrate a basic disarm technique. He said he was going to show her what real operators do when situations get complicated. He didn't wait for a response. He turned his back and addressed the room, letting her walk into position while he faced his audience. He didn't look at you when you were complying with him. He only looked at you when he wanted to make a point. He made a point. He turned without warning, and his right elbow came forward at the full extension of 220 pounds of forward momentum, and the force registered on the biometric sensors in the east wall at 87 pounds per square inch, nearly 3 times the safety threshold for training demonstrations, and the impact connected with the left side of Sarah Kane's face with a sound that made several observers go very still. Her head snapped back. She dropped. The room held its breath. She didn't make a sound. One knee on the mat, blood from a split lip beginning to fall onto the polished surface in small, precise drops. Her left hand found the mat edge. Fingers spread, thumb aligned with first knuckle, palm flat, weight distributed through the heel of her hand with the automatic precision of someone who has practiced falling and recovering so many times the body does it before the mind catches up. Derek Ashford, standing near the east wall with his arms crossed, straightened. He was a sergeant with the British SAS, 38 years old, billeted at Fort Cypher on an exchange program that had already lasted twice its original scheduled length. He had been watching this exercise with the careful neutrality of someone who had learned to stay uninvolved in things not his business. But that hand position on the mat stopped him cold. That was not how a translator caught herself falling. That was operator foundation work, the kind built over years of forced repetitions until it became what the body did before the brain caught up. He didn't say anything. He just watched. Marcus was already talking, addressing the room, framing what the observers had seen in terms that flattered his position. She had been struck because she lacked conditioning. She had been struck because she didn't belong in a space like this. He had pulled the strike, in the field that would have been a knockout. Colonel Hargrove's voice came from the direction of the control booth. It was not a loud voice. Hargrove almost never raised his voice, but it carried the way certain frequencies cut through interference not because of volume, but because of weight. Major, what exactly occurred here? Not a question, a framing. Marcus pivoted smoothly, explained the demonstration. Captain Kane had requested participation. He was showing her the realities of close quarters engagement. These things sometimes resulted in contact. Hargrove descended the 3 steps from the booth. His eyes went to Sarah, who was rising. Controlled, precise, vertical without wobble, no hand braced against anything, just standing up the way a specific kind of person stands up after being knocked down. Blood still coming from her lip, left eye beginning to swell. Captain, do you require medical attention? Negative, sir. You're bleeding. Observed, sir. He looked at her for a moment. Then at the biometrics panel on the east wall where a red light pulsed in an irregular pattern. Not a malfunction, an anomaly flag. A partial biometric match the system had registered and was attempting to classify against archived databases blocked by classification protocols requiring command-level authorization just to see what was being protected. He tapped the alert on his tablet. Query restricted. Authorization level insufficient. He took a screenshot. He looked at the blood drops on the mat, fallen in a small cluster evenly spaced. the pattern of someone who had not been moving, who had been very still, controlling themselves with precision while they bled. "This drill session is concluded," he said. "All personnel 15-minute break. Major Webb, Captain Kane, you'll remain." The room emptied. Hargrove documented what needed documenting. He ordered Sarah to medical bay in writing, non-negotiable. He confined Marcus to quarters pending investigation, using a tone that communicated clearly the investigation would be conducted seriously. When both had gone, he stood alone in the training room and looked at the blood on the mat. Then he opened a secure message channel and typed 3 words. "Run, Phantom Strike." The reply came back in 4 seconds. "Query restricted. Authorization level insufficient." He pocketed his tablet and left the room. Over the 2 weeks that followed, Marcus Webb ran the playbook, institutional systems, make available to people with enough rank and enough allies. He submitted a revised training roster, removing Sarah's name, citing medical evaluation as justification. The medical clearance she had filed the previous afternoon, fully releasing her for duty, was not mentioned. Captain Owen Prescott, the range officer, received the revised list without comment and posted it without question. He did not look comfortable about it. He looked like a man who had calculated where the risk was lower. Sarah's security card was flagged. Not expired. Flagged. Access declined at the intelligence briefing room, the advanced training facility, 3 secondary spaces. The flagging system showed a security compliance report as the origin. The investigating officer, according to the system, was Colonel Hargrove. He had not filed the report. She walked to the Security Administration office in Building 7 and spoke with the clerk, a specialist whose expression occupied the territory of maximum professional neutrality in the face of a situation he would very much prefer not to be involved in. She got what information he could give. She thanked him. She left. She was crossing the base when the email arrived. No subject line, anonymous routing, a single attachment, 4 megabytes. Video file. She found an empty briefing room, locked the door, and sat in the dark with her tablet. The video showed her in the training facility, except it didn't. The footage had been edited, not crudely, professionally, the kind of editing requiring technical skill and familiarity with the specific compression format Fort Cypher's security cameras used. In the version she was watching, she appeared to fumble a basic weapons disarm, hesitated at a critical moment, required correction from Derek Ashford, who stepped in and adjusted her grip like an instructor correcting a student on her first day. The timestamp was authentic. The base watermark was authentic. Sarah watched it 3 times. She knew the original footage. She had reviewed the camera coverage in her first week as part of her operational preparation baseline, mapping you do when you're going to spend months in a space where things might go wrong. She knew exactly what the original showed and what this version had replaced. She also knew the metadata routing on the email led back through 2 redirect servers to a workstation in the SEAL instructor office suite. Marcus was not working alone. Someone in that building had technical skills beyond what a SEAL instructor needed. Someone who knew the camera system, knew the compression format, knew how to route anonymous communications through internal servers in a way meant to be difficult to trace. Meant to be, not impossible. She forwarded the video to her encrypted server, added it to a folder she had named simply Evidence, deleted the email. She had 3 options: file a formal complaint, go through channels, trust the process, estimated success rate 30%, estimated timeline 3 weeks minimum. Marcus would use those 3 weeks effectively. Confront him directly. The confrontation would escalate and likely expose her before she finished what she came here to do. Or continue. Continue absorbing it. Continue appearing exactly as damaged and isolated and harmless as he needed her to appear, while the evidence accumulated in places he didn't know to look. Success rate above 50%. Timeline unknown, but probably not 3 weeks. She had been choosing option 3 for 4 months. She chose it again. She went to the dining facility that evening and ate alone at a corner table with an ice pack pressed to her left cheek. The bruising had spread overnight into purples and greens. Her left eye was half closed. She ate with the efficiency of someone who views food as fuel and had long since stopped confusing meals with anything more than that. Marcus came in with his usual accompaniment of junior officers. He saw her immediately. He came to her table. He tried charm with the practiced ease of someone who has learned charm is often more effective than force. He called what happened an unfortunate incident, said they were both professionals, implied that reasonable people understood how training worked, and moved on without making things complicated. Sarah set down her fork with precise care. "Major, are you apologizing?" "I'm saying we're professionals." We're whatever the investigation determines, sir. His smile stayed in place, but something behind it recalibrated. He left with his officers. 3 minutes later, Derek Ashford slid into the seat across from her. He set down a tray of food that suggested the kitchen had surrendered quality somewhere around 1400 hours. He didn't announce himself, didn't ask if the seat was taken, just sat down and started cutting through something that resisted the plastic cutlery with considerable determination. You're benching with that face, he said. I'm maintaining conditioning. You're proving a point. She didn't deny it. He told her about the logistics officer 4 months earlier. Concussion medical discharge investigation cleared because witnesses backed Marcus's story, and Marcus had spent years collecting the kind of debt that people repaid when asked. Derek leaned forward when he said it, voice dropping to the register people use when they want to be heard without being overheard. He's building something, Derek said, and you're the current target. Sarah drank from her water bottle, looked at him with her one fully functional eye. Thank you, Sergeant. He waited. Is that all you're going to say? What else is there? He shook his head the way people shake their heads when they haven't yet determined if someone is very calm or very stupid. He stood, collected his tray, and paused at the edge of the table. Watch your back. He doesn't like people who make him look bad. He walked away. Sarah finished her meal, cleaned her space. Tray to the collection point table wiped everything in its place. She walked back toward her quarters, through corridors emptying as the base moved into evening routine. Her left hand stayed near her side as she walked, fingers loose, ready. In her pocket the coin, 11 signatures, wearing thinner every day. She had work to do. 3 days after the dining facility conversation, Sarah arrived at the advanced training roster posting at 06:15 to find her name missing. She read the list twice. She walked to the range office and spoke with Captain Owen Prescott, who held his coffee like a shield, and told her Major Webb had submitted the revised list citing her medical status. She told him her medical clearance had been filed the previous afternoon. Full duty status. She placed the signed form on his desk. He picked it up, read it, set it down. Captain, he said, and then stopped. I don't want trouble. I understand, sir. If you have a problem with the roster, file a complaint. Understood. She left. In the corridor outside, she stood for 30 seconds. 4-count breathing. In, hold, out, hold. The pattern her body returned to when working through something unresolved. Behind her, through the range office window, Prescott picked up his desk phone and dialed a 3-digit internal extension. She didn't hear what he said. She didn't need to. The network was confirming she had shown up, reporting her response, functioning exactly as she had expected, and every time it functioned, it produced information. Information was documentation. Documentation was evidence. Evidence was the only thing that would survive what was coming. She walked away from the range office with no visible expression and no sound from her boots on the polished floor. Everything was going according to plan. Hers. The hearing convened at 0800 hours in Conference Room C, which was too small for the number of things it was about to contain. Colonel Hargrove arrived first. He set his tablet and coffee on the table with the precision of a man who imposes order on small things when large things are outside his control. He sat at the head of the table and waited. Marcus Webb arrived at 07:58, early enough to appear punctual without appearing eager. Dress uniform, every ribbon aligned, every crease correct. He carried a folder and set it on the table with the confidence of someone who believes the documents inside it will end a conversation before it properly begins. Captain Owen Prescott arrived 30 seconds later, looking like a man attending his own sentencing for a crime he hadn't quite committed but had certainly assisted with. He sat without making eye contact and placed his hands flat on the table. Sarah Kane arrived at exactly 7:58, sat at the foot of the table, and folded her hands. Hargrove opened the session without preamble. Marcus went first. He laid out his concerns with the thoroughness of someone who has rehearsed the delivery enough times to make it seem unrehearsed. Over the past 2 weeks, he said he had observed behavior from Captain Kane raising serious questions. She had insisted on participating in a training drill for which she lacked qualification. She had then harassed Captain Prescott regarding a roster adjustment made for legitimate medical reasons. She had pressed issues after being told by appropriate authority that those issues were closed. He used the word pattern 4 times. He recommended reassignment pending psychological evaluation. He said it like a man who does not expect to be challenged. Hargrove let the silence hold. Then he looked at Sarah. Captain Kane, do you have a response? Sarah looked at Marcus. Major Webb, you stated I failed to maintain defensive posture during the training incident. Can you describe what proper defensive posture looks like? Marcus answered without hesitation, hands up, elbows in weight forward, basic boxing stance. And you observed me failing to maintain this posture. Before or after you drove your elbow into my face, the room temperature dropped. Not metaphorically. The air conditioning unit in the wall happened to cycle on at that exact moment, and the coincidence was almost too convenient. Prescott studied the table. Marcus kept his expression level. He said a proper demonstration involved communication-controlled contact partnership. He said he was not responsible for Captain Kane's lack of conditioning or her decision to request participation in an environment she wasn't prepared for. Sarah nodded the way people nod when they are not agreeing with anything but are allowing someone to finish. Then she placed her tablet on the table and turned it toward the center of the room. "Sir," she said to Hargrove, "I'd like to submit footage for the record." What played on that tablet screen in the following 90 seconds did not require narration or explanation. The west wall camera had a clean angle. The timestamp was visible. The approach was visible. The complete absence of any warning signal, any verbal cue, any reduction of speed that would characterize a training demonstration was visible. The moment of impact was visible. The sound of it was worse through the tablet speaker than it had been in the room. Smaller, sharper, contained. Hargrove watched it without expression, then looked at Marcus. "Major, that doesn't look like a pulled strike." Marcus said camera angles could be deceiving. He maintained he had reduced force. Captain Kane's injury resulted from her inexperience, her failure to prepare for the realities of the training environment she had voluntarily entered. "The biometric sensors in this room," Sarah said, "logged your strike at 87 pounds of force. The safety threshold for training demonstrations is 30 pounds maximum." Marcus said the sensors weren't calibrated for individual strikes. "The NATO upgrade last quarter installed precision monitoring. Every impact above 20 pounds is logged and tagged to personnel biometrics. I can pull the full data file." Owen Prescott was now studying a point on the wall behind Hargrove's right shoulder with the focused attention of a man who has decided that appearing architecturally invisible is his best available option. Hargrove took his glasses off, cleaned them with the cloth from his breast pocket, put them back on. "Major Webb, did you know about the force monitoring?" Marcus's answer was technically a yes, but structurally an attempt to reframe what yes meant in this context. Hargrove didn't let him finish the reframe. "Captain Prescott, you're dismissed. Written statement by end of day, every detail." Prescott left with the speed of a man who has been offered a door and has no interest in testing whether it stays open. "Major Webb, confined to quarters pending investigation. Statement in writing by 1800 hours. Dismissed." Marcus left. The door closed. Hargrove refilled his coffee, took a long drink, sat back down. "Captain," he said, 23 years. I can identify an operation when I'm standing in the middle of one. Let's save time." Sarah held his gaze and said nothing. "Your clearance is restored as of this conversation," Hargrove said. "And if there is a larger situation developing on this base that I need to understand, I am asking you to help me understand it." "Sir," Sarah said carefully, "there are aspects of my assignment I'm not currently authorized to discuss. Your assignment as a translator, among other things." Hargrove studied her. The Gulf War had given him, among other things, a precise ability to recognize when someone was telling him the minimum true thing rather than the whole true thing, and an equally precise ability to decide whether to press or wait. He waited. "Sir," Sarah said, "I need 48 hours. 4. To allow the situation to develop to a point where the full picture becomes documentable. You're asking me to give you operational space. I'm asking you to give the truth operational space, sir. There's a difference." He looked at her, at the bruising spread across the left side of her face, at the cut on her lip healing to a thin dark line, at the absolute steadiness in her expression that he had been cataloging since her first week, and that still didn't fit the profile of a linguistics specialist, no matter how many times he compared the two. 48 hours, he said. Your clearance is restored, but if anyone on this base ends up seriously injured, I am burning whatever framework you've constructed, and we're doing this through official channels from the beginning." "Understood, sir. And for the record, you need actual medical attention, not clearance forms. That eye needs proper evaluation." "Yes, sir." She left the conference room with her clearance restored and 48 hours on the clock. In her pocket, the coin. She did not touch it. Not yet. 3 days before the hearing, Marcus had sent a mandatory notification to all personnel rostered for advanced tactical certification. Range qualification exercise. 0600 Friday morning. Live ammunition. Full combat simulation protocol. Attendance required. The notification came from Prescott's office email address. The routing metadata, if anyone checked, originated from a workstation in the SEAL instructor suite. Sarah checked. She also, the evening before the scheduled exercise, went to the armory. She was running inventory, a task she had volunteered for on 3 separate occasions over the preceding 2 months, each time producing documentation showing every weapon accounted for and every serial number matching the master log. This was the 4th time. The range officer on duty was a corporal, halfway through a novel, who had no objection to someone else doing the count. She went through 41 rifle optics before she found the first one. A scratch on the mounting rail. Recent. She held it under the task light. Not accidental, not wear, deliberate. The locking mechanism had been filed down at a precise angle, subtle enough to escape cursory inspection, significant enough that under recoil stress the optic would shift, would walk right as the barrel tracked left, would produce a consistent miss pattern that looked exactly like inexperience or poor fundamentals. She photographed it, logged the serial number, found 2 more with identical modifications over the next 12 rifles. All 3 tagged for Friday's qualification exercise. All 3 assigned to her. She finished the inventory, submitted the standard report showing everything accounted for and within normal parameters, sent a second encrypted message to a server address that didn't appear in any Fort Cipher directory. Then she went to find Owen Prescott. Prescott was in his office working through paperwork with the concentration of a man who has decided administrative focus is a reasonable substitute for personal integrity. He looked up when Sarah entered, and his expression shifted into something simultaneously apologetic and defensive. She told him she was confirming her attendance for Friday's qualification exercise. 0600 full combat simulation protocol. He blinked. Captain, given your recent medical situation, I assumed you might request an exemption. No exemption needed. I'm cleared for full duty. She placed her medical clearance form on his desk. Prescott picked it up, read it, set it down, looked at her with the expression of a man watching something proceed that he lacks the authority or courage to stop. I'll need a rifle assignment, standard issue. He typed her name into the roster and assigned her a weapon. She noted the serial number without appearing to write it down. Captain, Prescott said as she turned to leave. His voice had dropped to a register that wasn't quite a warning, but was the closest he was going to get. I would be very careful tomorrow. Sarah looked at him over her shoulder. I always am, sir. She left him sitting behind his desk, looking like a man who had just watched the door close on the last moment where a different choice was available to him. Friday morning arrived cold and dark the way November mornings at Fort Cipher arrived, without variation or apology. Sarah reported to the range equipment window at 0545, presented her ID, received her assigned rifle. She turned it over with the routine thoroughness of someone checking equipment before a range session standard, unremarkable exactly what everyone around her was doing. She ran her thumb along the mounting rail and felt the filing, right where she expected. She signed the equipment log and moved to the staging area. 15 personnel gathered in the early dark. The multinational geometry of a NATO facility, British exchange officer, Danish liaison personnel, American specialists from different program tracks. Derek Ashford was positioned near the observation tower, exactly where he had told her he would be, binoculars around his neck, tablet in hand. He was not officially part of this exercise. He had decided to be there, which said something about him, she noted, and filed. Colonel Hargrove stood near the control booth, separated from the main group, coffee in hand expression, in the same neutral territory it occupied when he was watching something and not ready to announce it. Marcus Webb stood at the range master position. Clipboard and stopwatch. Instructor face locked into position like something load-bearing. He called the exercise to order, standard NATO precision protocol. 10 rounds, 200 meters, 10 targets, 60 seconds to engage all targets. Minimum score for qualification was 7 hits. He consulted his clipboard. Captain Kane, you're up first. Of course she was. Maximum visibility, maximum witness exposure, maximum opportunity for the failure to be observed and documented by the largest possible audience. She had been placed first because first meant the most eyes, and the most eyes meant the most effective narrative when the scope failed and the grouping scattered. Sarah stepped to the firing line. She raised the rifle, settled into her stance, cheek to stock, breathing slow. She looked through the optic, and it showed her exactly what she had known it would show her, a sight picture that moved, a reticle shifting with the smallest pressure because the mount had been filed to make it shift. At 200 meters, that movement was the difference between center mass and a miss, and anyone watching her fire would understand why the grouping spread. Anyone who understood what she was about to do would understand something different entirely. She lowered the rifle slightly, looked at Marcus. Sir, the optic mount appears compromised. The sight picture is unstable. Marcus walked over with theatrical concern, turned the rifle over, looked at the scope, looked back at Sarah. Looks functional to me, Captain. Perhaps you're unfamiliar with the equipment. Sir, the mounting rail has been filed. The optic will shift under recoil. This weapon passed inspection yesterday. He stepped back, crossed his arms. If you're uncomfortable with standard NATO issue, I suppose we should note that, in your qualification record, you have 60 seconds on my mark. He looked at the assembled observers with the expression of a man about to demonstrate something he has demonstrated before. Sarah settled back into her firing position. She looked through the optic once more. Then she made a small, deliberate adjustment. She shifted her cheek weld, fractionally dropped her eye position, and found the iron sights mounted along the top rail below the scope. The backup aiming system. Standard on this platform, present on every rifle issued at this range. She had been shooting with iron sights since she was 22 years old. Ready, she said. Marcus called the mark. 10 rounds left the barrel in 47 seconds. The range fell quiet between each shot, not the silence of a problem, but of people paying close attention to something not going the way they expected. Cease fire. Targets forward. The electronic carrier brought the paper to the scoring position. Marcus walked to examine the results. He stood in front of the target for 5 full seconds without speaking. Around him, people began moving closer, drawn by the specific quality of his silence. 10 rounds, 10 hits, 9 in the center ring, one just outside clipping the 9 ring on the upper left. 98 out of 100 possible points. With a rifle whose optic had been deliberately compromised. At 200 meters, in 47 seconds. Marcus turned around slowly. Sarah ejected the magazine, cleared the chamber, engaged the safety. She held the rifle out toward Marcus. Would you like to inspect the weapon, sir? I'd like the optic damage documented before the equipment is returned to the armory. He took the rifle, looked at the mounting rail, saw the filing, looked at her. Looked at the 15 people standing around him, each of whom had now watched Captain Kane score 98 out of 100 using a rifle showing visible evidence of deliberate modification, with the range master standing 6 feet away, having just told her the weapon was functional. Derek Ashford had his binoculars down, just watching with his eyes. Hargrove set his coffee on the ledge of the control booth with a quiet precision that communicated everything without communicating anything. Marcus said, "How?" Sarah said, "Iron sights, sir. Standard backup aiming system. Any operator familiar with their weapon should be able to transition between optic and irons without significant accuracy degradation." The word operator sat in the sentence, doing work he hadn't expected it to do. "Various assignments, sir," she added. "Some aspects of my service record are classified above your current clearance level." Hargrove stepped forward. His timing was not accidental. He walked to Marcus, spoke 2 words quietly, and Marcus Webb went into the control booth. Hargrove followed. The door closed. The conversation lasted 11 minutes. When Marcus Webb came out of that booth, he looked different. Not broken, not defeated. Something more specific than either. He looked like a man who has just understood clearly and completely for the first time that he has been in a different story than the one he thought he was in. That the shape of the past 4 months has just revealed itself to be something other than what he constructed it to be. He crossed the range without looking at anyone. Derek Ashford watched him go, then looked at Sarah. He said nothing. But his expression said something that didn't require words, the recognition of someone who has just watched a long and patient thing complete itself. Hargrove came out 30 seconds after Marcus. He walked to where Sarah stood beside her for a moment, looking at the target still hanging in position downrange. "Captain." "Sir." "Medical bay, today. That is not a suggestion." "Yes, sir." He walked away without another word. The remaining 14 personnel moved through the rest of the qualification exercise. The scores were recorded, the weapons returned, the range closed at 0930, everything documented and submitted through appropriate channels, including the rifle with the filed mounting rail, which Hargrove had pulled from the return stack, and logged separately under a chain of custody form bearing his personal authorization code. Evidence properly handled was the only kind that survived. The trap was set. Now Sarah needed Marcus Webb to walk into it of his own accord. At 1400 hours he did. He filed a formal security complaint with the base adjutant's office. He alleged that Captain Sarah Kane had falsified her service credentials, misrepresented her qualifications to gain unauthorized access to restricted training programs, and was potentially operating under fraudulent orders. He demanded immediate investigation, suspension of her clearances, and confinement to quarters pending full review. He copied the complaint to NATO command. He copied 6 senior officers. He sent it through every official channel available to him with the thoroughness of someone who believes that volume and distribution are substitutes for position. He made it loud. He made it public. He made it impossible to ignore. In her quarters, Sarah read the complaint on her tablet. She read it twice. Then she sat with it for a moment, not because she needed to think about what it meant, but because she wanted to sit with the specific quality of this particular moment. 4 months of construction. 4 months of absorbing what he threw at her and converting it into documentation. He had just demanded an investigation into everything, which meant everything was going to be investigated, including Somalia, including the coordinates that were transmitted correctly and received incorrectly and why, including the classified after-action files sealed under a classification order requiring command-level authorization to open the kind existing specifically to prevent official inquiries from going places they were not supposed to go. Marcus Webb had just filed a formal complaint making a full investigation, not only justified, but mandatory. He thought he was ending her. He was opening the door she had spent 4 months waiting for him to open. Hargrove summoned them both at 1600 hours. Same conference room, same table, different atmosphere. The hearing 2 days ago had been procedural. This was something else. There was a third person at the table. A woman in civilian clothes, mid-40s, carrying a briefcase with government classification markings and the expression of someone who has done this specific kind of work long enough that surprise is no longer a condition she experiences professionally. She had dark hair and very still hands, and the quality of presence that belongs to people who have learned to take up only exactly as much space as they need. Major Webb Captain Kane, Hargrove said, "This is Special Agent Vera Tyndall, Office of Special Investigations." Major Webb submitted a formal complaint this afternoon requesting a full credentials investigation. Agent Tyndall is conducting preliminary assessment. Marcus recited his concerns with compressed efficiency. The falsified credentials, the misrepresented qualifications, the pattern of behavior suggesting someone operating outside her stated authority. Agent Tyndall listened without expression. When Marcus finished, she opened her briefcase. She removed a tablet. She turned it toward Marcus. "Major Webb, are you familiar with the designation Phantom Strike?" The color left Marcus Webb's face the way color leaves something when the thing supporting it has been removed. He said he had heard rumors. "Phantom Strike was a Tier 1 Special Operations Unit," Tyndall said, dissolved in October 2019 following the loss of personnel during a Somalia extraction operation. The unit was classified, scrubbed from active records, and sealed under a top-secret compartmentalized order. She paused. Captain Kane commanded Phantom Strike. Marcus Webb's hands pressed flat on the table. "The complaint you filed this afternoon," Tyndall continued, "has triggered a mandatory full review. That review will include the Somalia operation files, which your complaint has provided formal legal justification to unseal." She set the tablet down. "The investigation you requested is going to look at everything major, including things that have been sealed for 4 years. Across the table, Sarah said nothing. Marcus was shaking his head. He had been cleared. The investigation had been completed. The files were classified. There was a classification order. "There was," Tyndall said. "Your complaint supersedes it. Formal investigations into credentialing fraud require full access to relevant service records. Captain Kane's service records are relevant. All of them." Hargrove was watching Marcus the way Hargrove watched everything, with the patient attention of a man who has been collecting information for a long time and is watching it organize itself into a coherent shape. What happened next took less than 2 seconds. Marcus Webb had spent 4 years constructing a narrative, a version of Somalia casting him in a particular role, and burying the version where he made a decision for reasons he had spent every day since working very hard not to fully examine. Now the examination was coming regardless. And the 4 years of construction were visible for exactly what they were, and the person sitting across from him was the one person on Earth who had been in that operation and survived it. He moved without calculation, without tactical thought, just panic wearing the skin of action. He came across the table with both hands reaching. Sarah's left hand intercepted his right wrist at the midpoint of his extension, redirecting the momentum laterally rather than absorbing it. Her right hand came under his elbow, applying controlled upward pressure at the joint. She stepped offline and used his own forward motion to put him face down on the conference table, with his right arm locked at an angle, making resistance not painful but mechanically impossible. The entire sequence took less time than it takes to describe it. Zero injuries, minimal force, textbook defensive control. Hargrove pressed the alert panel on the wall. Sarah maintained the hold with steady measured pressure. Major Webb, stop resisting. His voice came out against the table surface, compressed and rough. You set me up. This whole thing, you planned all of it. I created conditions, Sarah said, where you revealed your own character. There's a difference. The Somalia files, those people are gone. Those people deserve a wall, Sarah said. They deserve their names in a place where they can be seen. You made sure that didn't happen. I'm making sure it does. The MPs arrived, 4 of them with the professional efficiency of people paid to handle these moments without adding to them. They took custody of Marcus Webb, applied restraints, delivered the required notifications. He was still talking when they walked him out, still attempting to restructure what had happened into something that could be argued against. The door closed. The room went quiet. On the table between the empty coffee cups and the scattered documentation and Vera Tyndall's briefcase lay the challenge coin. Sarah had set it down during the control hold without thinking about it and hadn't picked it back up. Hargrove looked at it. He reached into the inside pocket of his own jacket. He placed a second coin on the table beside hers. Different weight, different alloy, the kind issued to Gulf War veterans through a program that no longer existed in its original form. The surface worn in the way surfaces wear when handled every day for 30 years. On the face, an insignia from a unit that had served in the desert in 1991. On the back, a date, August 2nd, 1991, and below the date a number. 7. Sarah looked at it. 7 men in my unit didn't come home from the Gulf, Hargrove said. I carried that for 20 years before I put it in a drawer. Took me another 12 to take it back out. He paused. I'm not comparing. I'm explaining why I recognize what I'm looking at when I see it. Sarah held his coin for a moment. 2 worn discs on a conference table in a building full of people not having this conversation. Hers with 11 signatures. His with a number and a date and 30 years of weight behind it. She handed his back. He held it, looked at it, then looked at hers again. Looked at the 11 signatures almost worn to invisibility. 4 years, Sarah said. I was the only one who walked out. Hargrove was a Gulf War veteran. He understood without needing it, explained what it meant that she still had it. He had one of his own. He did not say anything for a long moment. Then he picked up his coin and put it back in his pocket. The 11 names, he said. They'll get their wall, she said. Hargrove stood. He looked at Tyndall, who was closing her briefcase with quiet efficiency. Captain Kane, he said, there's something else. He reached into his jacket pocket and removed a plain envelope. No return address, no postmark, no identifying marks of any kind. It had been opened already, the flap folded back. This arrived the morning you checked in, he said. I held it because I didn't understand it. I'm beginning to understand it now. She reached into the envelope and removed a photograph. Fort Cipher, the East Lawn late summer, the kind of light that only exists in August when the angle is right and everything is slightly too bright. A group of people standing in that light, 12 of them, some in uniform and some in civilian training gear. Taken from a distance, subjects unaware they were being captured. She recognized them immediately. Phantom Strike, August 2019, 1 month before Somalia. The last time all of them had been in the same place at the same time and hadn't known that the last time was what it was. She was in the center of the group, younger, before. She was laughing at something someone just out of frame had said. Her head turned slightly to the left, looking like someone who had not yet learned what the next 30 days were going to cost. Marcus Webb stood at the far right edge, smiling, with the people whose coordinates he would alter in 30 days. Smiling with all 12 of them. She counted. 12 people. Plus Marcus at the right edge, and at the left edge of the photograph, partially cut by the frame, barely visible, a 13th figure. Not in the official roster, not someone she recognized immediately. Someone who had been there in August 2019 but wasn't supposed to be there. Someone standing at the edge of a photograph that had been sent to Fort Cipher on the exact morning she checked in. Someone who knew she was coming. Someone who wanted her to succeed. Who sent this, she said. No name, no explanation. Hargrove paused. Someone knew you were coming. Someone wanted you to have this. Sarah looked at the 13 figure at the edge of the frame. the partial silhouette of someone who should not have been there and therefore had been almost successfully hidden by the framing. "I don't know yet," she said. She folded the photograph carefully and placed it in her jacket pocket beside the coin. 11 signatures on the coin. 12 faces in the photograph. A 13th at the edge of the frame. The investigation was just beginning. The MPs took Marcus Webb out of the building at 1647. Sarah watched from the second-floor window as they walked him across the main courtyard toward the security facility on the north side of the base. He was not struggling. That phase had passed into the conference room. He walked now with the quality of a man who has not yet decided what story he is going to tell about this moment, which meant he was still calculating, still looking for a frame that would hold. Some people never stop calculating. It is the thing that made them dangerous in the first place, and it does not switch off because the circumstances have changed. She watched until he disappeared through the security facility door. Then she turned back to the room. Agent Vera Tyndall was at the conference table, briefcase open, working through documentation requests on her tablet, with the unhurried efficiency of someone who has been preparing for this phase longer than the people in the room have been aware there was a process. Hargrove sat at the head of the table, coffee replaced making notes by hand in a small bound notebook that did not appear in any digital system. Sarah sat back down. "Captain Kane," Tyndall said without looking up, "the investigation into Major Webb will require your full testimony. Everything you observed over the past 4 months, every piece of evidence in your encrypted files. The Somalia operational files are being unsealed as of this afternoon. We will need complete chain of custody documentation for everything you collected." "It's ready," Sarah said. "Has been for 6 weeks." Tyndall looked up at that, a brief assessment passing across her face quickly and leaving no visible trace. But Sarah caught it. Tyndall had done enough of these to recognize the difference between someone who had been building a case and someone who had been building a case for this specific moment. "There is a secondary matter," Tyndall said. She removed a second folder from her briefcase. Thinner than the first. She placed it on the table but did not open it immediately. "During preliminary review of Major Webb's communications over the past 30 days, our technical division identified a secondary network of correspondence. Internal routing largely obscured operating through administrative email addresses not typically flagged for content review." She paused. "The correspondence originated from Major Webb's workstation, but was coordinated in part with a second terminal in the range officer's suite." Hargrove set down his pen. "Captain Owen Prescott," Tyndall said. The name landed with the weight of a thing that is not surprising and is still somehow damaging to hear confirmed. Prescott provided Webb with access to the base security camera system for approximately 3 years. He facilitated the modification of surveillance footage used in the anonymous communications sent to Captain Kane. He also provided administrative cover for the roster changes and clearance flag submitted under Colonel Hargrove's authorization credentials without Colonel Hargrove's knowledge. Tyndall opened the folder. "He was approached by our technical team at 1900 hours last night. He requested counsel and then at approximately 2200 agreed to a cooperation arrangement. In our experience, individuals in his position make that decision quickly once they understand that the person they were protecting has already been placed under arrest. The calculation changes." She produced the restraint order documents from her briefcase, handing them to the MP at the door. "Captain Prescott is being taken into custody as we speak." Sarah thought about Prescott in his office holding his coffee like a shield, about the way he had said her name when she came to confirm qualification attendance, about "I would be very careful tomorrow," as if warning her could offset what he had been doing for 3 years, as if the warning was a payment toward a debt he knew he could not fully settle. He had helped arrange the trap. At the final moment, he had offered the smallest possible gesture toward conscience, not enough to stop anything, just enough to allow him to tell himself in the private accounting he would carry the rest of his life that he had tried. "What are the charges?" Hargrove said. "For Captain Prescott, conspiracy, obstruction, falsification of official records, conduct unbecoming, potentially accessory to assault given prior knowledge of the rifle modification." Tyndall sorted her documents. "For Major Webb, the list is considerably longer. The full picture of what Marcus Webb had done in September of 2019 came out over the following 48 hours, assembled from the unsealed Somalia files, the communications records that had survived 4 years of classification, and the financial documentation the OSOIE forensic accounting team had been building since Tyndall's office received its initial referral 3 weeks before Sarah Kane checked into Fort Cipher. Hargrove sat in on the briefing Tyndall conducted in the secure conference room. Sarah was present. two OSI analysts, a JAG representative to advise on the legal dimensions of what was being presented. The facts were as follows. In the summer of 2019, a defense contracting firm operating in East Africa had an intelligence gathering operation running in a corridor overlapping with Phantom Strike's operational theater. The contracting firm was not officially supposed to be operating in that corridor. They were, and the people who knew, had decided that looking away was administratively simpler than addressing it. When Phantom Strike was assigned an extraction operation in September of that year, the operational planning documents were handled through a coordination channel that included Marcus Webb in his capacity as tactical liaison. His access to those documents was legitimate. His use of that access was not. He provided the contracting firm's regional security officer with a general summary of the extraction timeline and corridor, not the specific coordinates, not the full operational package, just enough for the firm to ensure their own people were not in the extraction zone at the relevant time. He received $40,000. He did not know or chose not to examine closely enough the arrangement the contracting firm's regional security officer had with a third party who was very interested in knowing when a small team of American Special Operations personnel would be moving through a specific corridor in a specific window of time. That third party was not interested in deconfliction. Marcus did not falsify the coordinates himself. He provided information to someone who used it to arrange a reception. Whether he understood the specific downstream consequence, whether he told himself the money was for something harmless, whether he had spent 4 years genuinely believing his decision was categorically different from what it turned out to be, that was a question for the court-martial to examine and for Marcus Webb to carry for the rest of his life. 11 people went into an ambush instead of an extraction point. Sarah Kane was pulled out by a local national who found her in a drainage ditch 200 meters from the ambush site, wounded and unconscious, and who made a decision nobody ever officially documented to carry her to the nearest medical post instead of leaving her there. She woke up 7 days later in a military hospital in Germany with no unit, no mission on record, and 11 people who existed in her memory and nowhere else. Hargrove listened to all of it without expression. When Tyndall finished, he was quiet for a moment. He convinced himself it was a business transaction, Hargrove said. For 4 years, yes, Tyndall said. The self-justification in these cases is usually extensive. The more time passes, the more elaborate it becomes. She organized her documents. That's what made Captain Kane's operational approach necessary. A direct accusation 4 years after the fact without this level of documented pattern would have been substantially easier to argue against. Hargrove looked at Sarah. You knew the documents alone wouldn't be enough, he said. Documents can be challenged, Sarah said. Pattern of behavior is harder to dismiss. I needed him to demonstrate in documented circumstances in front of witnesses over a sustained period that the behavior in Somalia was consistent with who he was. Not an aberration, a pattern. 4 months, Hargrove said. 4 months. Outside the conference room windows, Fort Cipher conducted its morning routine with the organized indifference of an institution that does not pause for the weight of individual events. Vehicles moved. Personnel crossed between buildings. The base continued the way institutions continue by absorbing what happens inside them and converting it into procedure. The 11 names, Hargrove said finally. There will be a formal recommendation to the Secretary of Defense's office for posthumous recognition within the week, Tyndall said. Phantom Strike will be officially reinstated in the historical record. The classification order will be lifted for the purpose of memorial documentation. She paused. They'll get their wall. Sarah looked at her hands. The coin was in her pocket. 4 years of that weight. 4 years of reaching for it in moments like this, one moments where the gap between what had happened and what had been acknowledged felt like a physical distance. She sat with her hands open on the table and let the information settle. The memorial ceremony was held 3 weeks later, not at Fort Cipher. At the headquarters of the Joint Special Operations Task Force in Northern Virginia, a building sitting on a campus most people drive past without noticing on roads they take to get somewhere else. Inside, there is a corridor running the length of the East Wing, and on the walls of that corridor are plaques. Bronze plaques, each bearing the name and rank and unit of personnel whose service occurred in places and under conditions requiring at the time that no record be made. The corridor is not long, the plaques do not fill it, but it changes the quality of the air when you walk into it the way certain places do, regardless of their size, because of what they represent and the silence that has accumulated in them over years. 11 new plaques were mounted on the east wall at 1000 hours on a Thursday in December. Each one bore a name, a rank, a date. The Phantom Strike insignia officially restored to the historical record 48 hours earlier by a document signed by undersecretaries and a deputy director, classified at a level ensuring the right people would know without it requiring public management. Sarah stood in dress uniform at the end of the row. She had spent the morning getting dressed with the methodical attention she gave to everything, each ribbon aligned, each crease pressed boots, with the kind of shine that takes practice rather than products to achieve. The bruising on her face was gone. The cut on her lip had healed to a line so thin it was visible only in certain light, a small scar she had examined in the mirror that morning without particular feeling. She was 38 years old. She had been 34 when Somalia happened. The 4 years between those two ages had contained things she would spend the rest of her life integrating, the kind of experiences that do not become part of your history so much as they become part of your structure, load-bearing walls you build around rather than through. Colonel Hargrove stood beside her. He had driven up from Fort Cypher in his personal vehicle, arriving 40 minutes before the ceremony. He had not said anything elaborate when he arrived. He shook her hand, stood next to her, and that was what the moment required, and he understood that. He stood beside her now as the plaques were unveiled one at a time. Marcus Reed, Tyler Cross, the others in the order they had joined the unit, which was the order Sarah knew them, the order in which they existed in her memory as individual people rather than as a collective loss. Each name read aloud, each followed by a silence the ceremony's conductor held for a full count before moving to the next. When they were done, Sarah walked slowly down the row and stopped at the first plaque. Marcus Reed, 28 years old, Bozeman, Montana, the one who taped photographs of his daughter to the inside of his locker. She put her hand on the bronze. The metal was cold, freshly mounted, not yet warmed by the building's ambient temperature or the hands of the people who would stand here in the years to come. Cold and smooth, and exactly as permanent as anything is permitted to be. She stood there for a long time. Hargrove stood back. He understood that this was not a moment requiring his proximity. He stood far enough away to give her the space the moment asked for, which was something he had learned in 30 years of service, that the most useful thing a senior officer can sometimes do is position themselves correctly and then not interfere with what needs to happen. Derek Ashford was there. He had driven up on his own, arriving shortly before the ceremony, with no explanation offered and none required. He stood on the far side of the corridor, back against the wall, in the quiet, unobtrusive way he had been present at Fort Cypher for 4 months. When Sarah turned and saw him, he gave the single small nod that was apparently his entire vocabulary for moments of this kind. She returned it. Vera Tyndall stood near the exit with a folder, which was apparently the condition under which she attended any gathering. She waited until the formal portion of the ceremony concluded before approaching. "The court-martial for Major Webb is scheduled for March," she said. "I'll need your formal deposition before the end of January. You should expect the process to take most of next year." "Understood." Captain Prescott has entered into a full cooperation agreement. His testimony will supplement the documentary evidence. The charge sheet for Major Webb currently stands at 14 counts. Tyndall paused. The defense will argue mitigating circumstances regarding the Somalia operation. The prosecution is well positioned to counter those arguments. "He'll face what he did," Sarah said. "Yes." Tyndall nodded once and returned to her folder. Hargrove appeared at Sarah's elbow. He reached into his jacket pocket and removed the envelope, the same one from the conference room. He held it out. "I've been carrying this since the day you arrived," he said. "It belongs with you." She took it, removed the photograph. August 2019. 12 people in late summer light, herself at the center, laughing. Marcus Webb at the right edge, smiling with the people whose coordinates he would alter in 30 days. And at the left edge, the partial silhouette of the 13th figure. She had looked at this photograph every night for 3 weeks, studied the 13th figure from every angle the image permitted. The partial profile suggested someone deliberately positioned on the periphery of the group, someone there without being of the group, someone who had stood in that position and been captured by a lens whose operator was photographing 12 people and had not been aware there was a 13th present. She did not know the face, but someone had taken this photograph. Someone had kept it for 4 years. Someone had known that Sarah Kane was going to check into Fort Cypher on a specific morning and had sent the photograph to arrive on that exact morning without a name, without an explanation, as if the photograph itself was the explanation. "Do you know who sent it?" she said. "No," Hargrove said. "There's no record of how it arrived. It was on my desk when I came in that morning. No one in the building had any information about it." She looked at the plaques. Phantom Strike had officially lost 12 personnel in Somalia. That was what the official record stated. That was what the after-action reconstruction concluded. But the after-action reconstruction had been conducted with incomplete information. The classification order had been applied before the full accounting was finished. 3 personnel had been listed as unaccounted for rather than confirmed dead because the ambush site was not recoverable for proper documentation. Unaccounted for was not the same thing as gone. She had carried this possibility for 4 years as something too dangerous to examine closely. If she looked at it directly and it turned out to be nothing, the cost of that was something she might not recover from. She had kept it at the edge of her attention, the way the 13th figure stood at the edge of the photograph. Present, not yet knowable. If someone survived Somalia, Hargrove said, carefully watching her face, and has been operating outside official records for 4 years, then they couldn't come forward until the classification order was lifted, Sarah said. Until the official record acknowledged what happened. Until there was something to come forward to. The order was lifted 48 hours ago. Yes, sir. They stood with that in the cold air of the memorial corridor. In Vera Tyndall's office in Arlington, 3 days after the memorial ceremony, a meeting took place in a room not appearing on the building's public directory. Sarah sat on one side of a table. Tyndall sat across from her. Between them lay a folder marked with a classification stamp applied 48 hours ago, meaning the documents inside had existed in unclassified form for precisely that long after spending 4 years in a category making them officially inaccessible to everyone, including the people they concerned. Tyndall opened the folder. Tower 4, she said. Sarah looked at the documents. Tower 4 was the designation for a task force under construction for 14 months in by the Special Operations Oversight Structure. Its mandate was the identification and investigation of security threats operating under official military cover, specifically individuals in positions of institutional authority who use that authority to compromise operations personnel and national security interests. The pattern described in the documents was consistent across the cases identified so far. Authority exploited for private gain. Institutional machinery used to suppress accountability. Individual officers insulated by rank and network from consequences for decisions that had cost other people their lives or careers. 3 active cases, 3 bases, 3 individuals identified by the same behavioral pattern Marcus Webb had demonstrated at Fort Cipher over 4 months of very careful observation. The commanding officer designation on the Tower 4 organizational chart was listed as TBD. The appointment was contingent on the resolution of the Fort Cipher situation, Tyndall said. The reasoning being that the officer commanding Tower 4 needed to have demonstrated in operational conditions the specific capabilities the mission requires. She slid a single additional document across the table. Colonel Hargrove submitted a formal commendation for your conduct over the past 4 months. The Task Force Oversight Committee reviewed it yesterday. Sarah looked at the appointment document. This gives you command authority over all 3 active investigations, Tyndall said. Full operational discretion on cover methodology. Resource allocation through the Oversight Committee. No fixed base assignment. You go where the cases are. Sarah read the document. All of it. The way she read everything with the attention that comes from knowing that documents are where the real conversation happens underneath the words in the structure of what is committed to and what is left unspoken. The 3 individuals currently under investigation, she said. What's their status? All 3 are operational. All 3 are currently unaware that an investigation exists. The behavioral pattern in each case was identified through signals analysis, not direct observation. Tyndall paused, which means each case is at the stage the Fort Cipher situation was at when you arrived. Before the observation phase, before the documentation phase. She looked at Sarah directly. Before someone decided to walk in and let them think they had found an easy target. Sarah set the document down. She thought about Fort Cipher in July, walking down a corridor that smelled like floor wax and recycled air, hearing a laugh from behind double doors and knowing whose laugh it was and what it meant and what she was going to have to absorb before she could answer it. She thought about 4 months of ice packs and biometric data and encrypted files and the particular exhaustion of performing weakness so accurately that the performance itself became a kind of strength. She thought about 11 plaques on a wall in a corridor in Northern Virginia. She picked up the pen. She signed the appointment document. Tyndall collected it with the same efficient neutrality she applied to everything, slid it into her briefcase, and closed the clasp. The first case is in Germany, she said. Army intelligence. The pattern has been active for approximately 8 months. We have signals. We don't have documentation. She handed Sarah a second folder. There's a linguistic consulting contract providing appropriate administrative justification for a 6-month attachment. Linguistic consulting, Sarah said. You are on paper an exceptional translator. Sarah opened the folder. 3 photographs, 3 names, 3 people who had been doing what Marcus Webb did and had not yet encountered anyone watching with the specific quality of attention that made the doing of it unsustainable. She would give them 4 months, maybe 5, depending on how the pattern developed. She would walk into the room and she would be exactly what the paper said she was, and she would wait for them to decide she was safe to dismiss. And then she would wait some more. Patience was not a technique she had learned. It was something built into her over 4 years of carrying something that needed to be carried and not putting it down until the time was right. She closed the folder. She reached into her jacket pocket and took out the challenge coin. She held it in her palm and looked at it the way she had looked at it every evening for 4 years. The insignia worn almost to abstraction. The 11 signatures worn almost to invisibility. Almost, not quite. She turned it over once, ran her thumb across the 11 names she could no longer see, but could still feel the faintest topographic suggestion of signatures in metal that had been handled 10,000 times. Then she placed the coin on the table beside the Tower 4 folder. Tyndall looked at it. Someone guided me here, Sarah said. Someone knew I was coming before I told anyone I was going. Someone has been watching this situation for longer than I have. She looked at the coin. I think there may be someone who has been waiting for the classification order to lift the same way I was waiting for Marcus Webb to make his final mistake. And if that's true, then I'd like to know before I walk into Germany. She looked at Tyndall. The 3 Phantom Strike personnel listed as unaccounted for after Somalia. I'd like their names cross-referenced against any individual with access to Fort Cypher's administrative systems in the past 12 months. Tyndall wrote something on her tablet. I'll have the cross-reference by Friday, she said. Sarah picked up the coin. She picked up the Tower 4 folder. She stood. Thank you, Agent Tyndall. She walked out into the corridor and down its length toward the exit footsteps, quiet on the tile floor folder under one arm. Outside it was cold, the kind of cold that arrived in Virginia in December and stayed without apology. She stood on the steps of the building and looked at the gray sky. She thought about Marcus Reed, 28 years old, whose daughter was 5 now, and would not remember him and would someday be old enough to understand that he was on a wall in a corridor, in a building most people drove past without noticing, on roads they took to get somewhere else. She thought about 11 promises made on a November night at Fort Cypher when she opened a file she didn't need to open because she had memorized every face years ago. She thought about the 13th figure at the edge of a photograph, about the possibility she had carried for 4 years as something too fragile to examine directly. The classification order had been lifted 48 hours ago. If someone was out there, they could come forward now. If someone was out there, they already had. She looked at the coin one more time. Then for the first time in 4 years, she did not grip it. She carried it loosely in her hand as she walked to her car, not pressing it into her palm against the weight of 11 names in 4 years of waiting. Just carrying it, the way you carry something when the carrying has changed, when the reason for holding on has not disappeared but has become something different, not a debt still owed, but a promise already kept and the next one already begun. She reached the car, opened the door, placed the Tower 4 folder on the passenger seat. She placed the coin in the cup holder. Right there. Visible. Not hidden. Not gripped. She started the car. The first case was in Germany. Monday was 4 days away. Sarah Kane pulled out of the parking lot and onto the road that most people took to get somewhere else, and the building in the rearview mirror grew smaller, and the corridor inside it, where 11 names were finally on a wall, receded behind her, and the road ahead was the only thing in front of her, and that was exactly enough.